Hello, welcome to the MGH FTD Unit Community Forum Friday session, Connecting Through Community, the Power of Support Groups. My name is Katie Brandt, and I'm the Director of Caregiver Support Services and Public Relations for the MGH FTD Unit. For those of you who don't know, that's the Massachusetts General Hospital Frontal Temporal Disorders Unit, led by Dr. Brad Dickerson. We're thrilled to be here today. Our Community Forum Friday events are geared toward our community of persons living with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, frontal temporal degeneration, or related condition, and their care partners. I bring together community experts, colleagues, and even friends so that we can talk about topics that are relevant to your lives. I am honored today to be joined by two amazing guest speakers, Amy Almeida and Bridget Moran-McCabe. Amy Almeida, many of you may know her. She is a member of our Greater Boston FTD community and has been for the past decade. Amy joined because she herself was a caregiver to her mother. 6 years ago, she became a trained co-facilitator for the Boston area FTD Caregiver Support Group. Amy, welcome.
Morning, Katie. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. And we also are thrilled to have a national representative today. Bridget Moran-McCabe brings 15 years of experience working with individuals and families from a myriad of different communities. And she joined the Association for Frontal Temporal Degeneration in 2015 as their first support services manager. In her role at AFTD, Bridget has trained and provided programming for over 150 AFTD support group volunteers. Now you'll notice that Amy and I are both wearing our AFTD pins today because we are both AFTD trained support group volunteers. And Bridget has started a national men's FTD caregiver support group and the first ever ALS with FTD caregiver support group in the world. Bridget has led AFTD's national primary progressive aphasia caregiver group for 4 years. She's also co-presented on topics from AFTD's network of support and the ALS with caregiver support group. Most recently, Bridget led the team that created AFTD's newest booklet. And by the way, they have so many wonderful educational booklets. But the newest one is Walking with Grief, Loss and the FTD Journey. She's honored to be able to provide support for the FTD community and remains in awe of the commitment and compassion that our volunteers show every day. Bridget, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the title of this Community Forum Friday, Connecting Through Community, the Power of Support Groups. I have invited both of you because you're both so intimately connected with the support group experience. And this morning, I hope to start our discussion. Oh, before we start, the thing that I always forget to remind people is that you're welcome to ask questions or make comments in the Q&A box. So if everybody looks at the bottom of their Zoom screen, you'll see a little Q&A. So please type your questions in there, and Bridget and Amy and I will do our best to address them throughout the program. Good. So getting back to the topic at hand, Bridget, it was so important to have you join us because you represent the support services arm at AFTD. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about why does AFTD see that as important?
Sure. So again, I really appreciate you joining or asking me to join you today. And thanks to you and to MGH and all who contribute to kind of putting this program together throughout the pandemic. I have heard actually from several people who have been tuning in to previous Community Forum Fridays, and they've all just expressed how much it's meant to them. So, so thank you for offering this. And then, I'm going to jump right into that question. So we know that this disease impacts families in different ways, but, it is a difficult journey for all until there's treatment and a cure. And so we really want to provide necessary information to help, but also, support to each person that's impacted so that they know that they're not alone. AFTD was founded by caregivers. They actually met each other at the first ever FTD specific support group. And since our inception, support has really remained paramount as part of our mission. So, we provide support in a broad range of ways. And, for the person that's living with FTD, we have Zoom support groups that meet monthly. And our discussion today is going to be a little more focused on that network of support that Katie was describing that we had built out. And that's specifically for adult family caregivers. But I'm going to show a visual towards the end with a little bit more information on where to find support if you are a person living with FTD. And also know that AFTD is currently working with our community to build out a council that will really help to inform us of that lived experience of FTD and bring that perspective into all aspects of our mission. Currently, we, as Katie mentioned, we work with volunteers to start support groups as one of the main resources and ways of gaining support. So I've worked for the past 5+ years and have heard from many who have been able to join those support groups that it really is a lifeline for them. And so, as Katie mentioned, her and Amy included, we currently have 98 volunteers across the country who lead 78 support groups, as some are co-led, as Katie and Amy's is. And, I'm going to share a little bit about how you can find a support group in your area towards the end with a short slide of how to navigate our website to find that. But for most of the people that are volunteering to do this role, they're either currently caregiving themselves or have lost a loved one to FTD. And we also have a few dedicated professionals who lead the groups as well. But with so much of that lived experience as a caregiver, we decided to choose a peer-based model for our group. And so it's not an expert that's going to be coming in each month to kind of teach you something as a group member, but it's really the group itself that's kind of helping each other and to learn from each other. And so that means that the group is going to look different, based on who's coming, who's sharing, but really the themes throughout that peer model are focused on each member's story. And so I know Amy's going to share a little bit more about her experience with this, but I think it is really important for people to know that there's a place that's free of judgment. So we come and learn how to articulate this disease, but to really share the part of your story that's relevant for you that month. And so that sharing and that listening is really what the group is for. But I don't want to fall into the trap that support groups are only about talking about feelings. And so, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but that the group really holds a safe space to kind of take a pause from the stress and maybe some of the chaos of our daily lives to kind of fill in the blank for what you need during that pause. And so I really do view groups as a kind of necessary piece of that elusive self-care that we kind of talk about when we say, caregivers should have self-care. That can mean a lot of different things, and the support groups is one way of achieving that. So, along the journey for yourself as a caregiver, you're going to need the group to change and to be flexible based on what your needs are and what you're bringing. And I think that one of the unique things and really the power of the support groups is that they're always going to be there to be able to listen and to validate. As I mentioned earlier, I think that judgment piece is really important. I know a lot of caregivers have told me that they often feel judged by, their family or their friends or people that are outside of the situation, and that can really wear on them. So they start to isolate because they don't really think that people understand the situation that they're in. And, that pattern is really seen outside of FTD as well with caregiving in general, but within our community, the misunderstood symptoms and the lack of really understanding the progression of the disease, even from the doctors who don't necessarily have answers about those progressions and, you know, what the disease is going to look like over time for each individual person, kind of creates that further divide for isolation. And so if you're, you know, coming to the group and you're in that space where you can talk about the impact of that judgment, or even process or learn to kind of cope with it, you know, and have others who are also there, who are going to honor all of the hard things that you're doing as a caregiver that can go unnoticed by a lot of other people. And, you know, sometimes it can also mean, in terms of the group, that you collectively decide that you do want a little bit more information about a certain aspect of building a care team, or, you know, part of the resources that are available. And so they can have guest speakers come, but really the majority of the meetings are about checking in with each other, being there to support each other. And because the groups are peer-led, you know, the facilitator interacts in that way too. As volunteers who are doing this, they're sharing their own stories and are participating as part of the group. And so it really does create an environment that's, you know, intended for a lay and adult family caregiver experience. And as Katie had mentioned before, you know, we do have, for people that don't have groups locally, we do offer national-based groups. And so, for instance, we, in addition to the ones that Katie shared, if you are a spouse, if your spouse has FTD and you have children in the home, we have kind of a parent group for you. And then in addition with the ALS with FTD, but we also have, you know, folks that are dealing with language symptoms nationally, or behavioral symptoms nationally, who don't have that local group. So there's lots of ways to kind of engage with the support group piece. I'll kind of talk a little bit about other ways of support. We know support groups isn't for everyone. And, you know, I'll kind of share a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But for now, you know, I think that that's really the power. And I know Amy's going to talk a little bit more about her experience of exactly what that looks like.
Well, Bridget, that was like a tour de force overview of support groups, right? But what I love that you're really calling attention to is, what we're hoping today is that people will get a feel, right? If they've never been to a support group, what should they expect? And I think that the point that you brought forth, that the AFTD connected support groups are peer facilitated, and that essential piece of being in a room where everyone has an understanding of that lived experience. And, you know, I know that Amy has been on both sides of the support group experience. And Amy, I'm wondering, in fact, I think this month might be your 10-year anniversary in the FTD community. But I would love to hear from you. You know, when you first walked into a support group, what were you looking for? You know, was it about that you wanted to share the emotions, or were you looking for something else when you came into a support group?
Thanks, Katie. Yes, this is the 10th anniversary of my involvement in the Boston area FTD caregiver support groups. My mom was diagnosed by Dr. Dickerson at the MGH FTD unit in June of 2010, and he and his staff told our family about the support group, and it took me until September, a few months later, to get to the support group. But when I first went, you know, Bridget mentioned folks sharing feelings and emotions. That wasn't why I was going. I wasn't my mom's 24/7 caregiver. I was her full-time caregiver on the weekends, but at the time I was still working full-time. And what I was looking for was you know, an understanding of the disease, tools that would help me and my family navigate the disease a little easier. You know, someone else in our support group, you know, talks about not wanting to reinvent the wheel with respect to care. And that's the way I felt, that I just wanted to go there and learn to, you know, so our family could plan, create what we call a deep bench of caregivers for my mom, and understand, you know, what steps would we need to take to make sure that my mom had as fulfilling a life as possible for the time she had left.
That Amy, that's beautiful. And I think when we think about the tips and tricks and resources, what's the thing that we also caution caregivers as they come into support group? They're going to hear a lot of stories.
Right. And, I just to, some of the stories are very, very serious and sad. In fact, one of my brothers came to support group the month that Katie, you told the group about your husband's passing.
Yes.
And nevertheless, he never came back. And so you can come, you can hear some terribly sad stories, but it's important to realize that the stories you hear, not all of those things that you hear about are going to happen to your family and your loved one.
Right.
It's the disease. There's a lot unknown with this disease, and I think as I've learned the catchphrase from AFTD, if you know one case of FTD, you know one case of FTD.
Right. And that's I think a really important thing to highlight. Now I'm feeling like I want to reach out to your brother and offer him more support, but it's coping skills. So as Bridget's mentioning the importance of self-care, so one piece of your self-care plan could be to put it on your calendar that you're going to go to support group. But what we're hoping is that at support group, as you're learning about tips and tricks to handle incontinence or communication challenges, that maybe you're also hearing a tip or a trick to take a shower by yourself, to have 5 minutes to meditate. Amy, I know you have a star caregiver in your support group who's talked about how does she fit in time for herself throughout her day.
Right. So caregivers do try to make some time for themselves. So, this one caregiver that Katie mentioned, make sure she always wakes up ahead of her husband and has her cup of coffee before he's awake. Her having that cup of coffee puts her on, a good trajectory for the day. And she knows once she has that cup of coffee in her, she's fueled to have a good day with her husband.
Yeah, I love that because it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a small thing. So I love that. Thinking about that, you can go to support group looking for what you need. You can take from others' experiences, but know that every experience won't be yours, and hopefully walk out with coping skills for the journey.
And I have to say that, the community that the support group engenders is so special. I felt it myself. I'm sure you have, Katie, and we hear it continually from caregivers that, when I come in, I talk about my spouse's behavioral or communication challenges. Everyone, nods in understanding. It's not something new to the folks in the group. When I came in and told the group about my mom getting dressed and going out to Kohl's, walking over to Kohl's at 2 a.m. to go shopping, no one was judgmental, and everyone was understanding and, eager to help my family figure out a solution to this problem.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing, Amy, that I too started in the FTD community as a family caregiver. And I know for sure that joining support group changed the trajectory of my experience with this disease. And it helped me to feel connected so I could move forward. When we're thinking about that, how it's inspired both of us to become volunteers in the community, there's something very interesting that Bridget was talking about. That's something that I did learn in support group, but I didn't really realize it. And that's this ability to advocate and articulate needs or challenges. And Bridget, I would love it if you could talk a little bit more about that, because that truly was an essential skill for me while I was an active family caregiver for my late husband. And actually, it's a skill I still use today as I'm an Alzheimer's caregiver for my dad.
Yeah, sure. So I think, when we talk about, oh, I'm on mute, aren't I?
Oh, we can hear
No,
you.
I'm not. Oh, great. I thought for a second maybe I was. Okay. So, I think it can be really overwhelming for new folks who are learning about this rare disease. And a lot of people say that the hardest part in the beginning is that it's a rare disease that no one's ever heard of. And, that places a burden on the person with FTD and their family to really provide the details and that articulation to be able to say the words of a really complicated neurodegenerative disease that we don't currently have or know what the progression is going to look like for each person that's diagnosed. And so families need to start talking about it, right? So they tell their family, they tell their friends, maybe jobs or other community members. And the FTD subtypes and symptoms, and as well as the progression, they're all coming from medical textbooks. So words like supranuclear and aphasia and palsy, and the one that still trips me up, anosognosia, those words are really met with blank stares. And so at first, for the family, that's a moment of, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I need to learn more. And then for extended family and the community, it's just constantly, the family needing to go back and do that educational piece with everyone with words that are like not a normal vernacular in our language. So, I think everyone understands what cancer is collectively. No one really understands what these really complicated diseases are. So, that as Amy described, you come to the support group to learn more. You get comfortable with both pronouncing the words and interpreting them and being able to share what they look like, right? And so anosognosia, for instance, means that, the person with FTD has a common symptom that they're not aware of anything, that anything's actually wrong with them. So, they're learning those kinds of things in the group. Maybe they're understanding that others who are in the group are talking about how they've utilized palliative care to talk about decision-making related to their circumstances, or maybe, that there's someone that's been eligible for a certain benefit based on whatever the state mandate is. So now, the caregiver can start thinking about what the needs are for themselves and their own situations and kind of understand what the parameters are for what the care team can look like or can be built out as. And so, what is or isn't available, or how they approach the conversation with a healthcare professional who might not be familiar with FTD, or, talk about the disease in a way that kind of makes connections for the resources or the help that's available. And, I think that that's one huge piece to the group, being able to kind of make those connection points and understand that. And then additionally, I also think that the groups are a place to process all of that and some. So, they might not have anyone else in their circle of community that they're able to talk to about it. Or maybe, the family doesn't feel comfortable talking about certain aspects of care with the support systems that aren't in group. So the support group is really also a place to begin to process some of those things, kind of lean on each other about the realities of care, or some of those more difficult conversations like Amy was describing that are sad, or, have a place where, people can really get to a place for themselves where they can articulate how hard it has been. And so, they can also be a place where, the groups can, members can help you to formulate your own plan and kind of understand FTD. And so, the members can begin to process and identify what their own needs are, what those coping skills could look like. Maybe, the grief that they've been feeling that they didn't understand was grief, or other emotions like that kind of come in the daily kind of struggle of balance that sometimes happens with FTD. And so, all the decisions that we have to make as caregivers, or that our community has to make as families, they're really difficult and they can really take a toll. And so again, having that safe space to be able to articulate and talk about those challenges as well as the successes is really at the heart, I think, of the benefit of a group. And, I said this earlier, but your story is really so powerful, and, both that you've been able to formulate it for yourself, first and foremost, and I think the group can be helpful with that, in really looking at everything that you're facing, and being able to share that to benefit others who are in your group who are listening. And so that mutual support part is also something that I think is really powerful about the group. It kind of breaks through that isolation that our caregivers face, and they're able to connect, as Amy was describing, with, and as Katie's doing as we're talking, nodding and just having other members be able to say, this is crucial to us being able to have a formulated space where people just get it and they don't have to go through what FTD is, et cetera. And so that leaves a space, because they don't have to fill that time with having to describe the disease. It leaves time for a place of beginning to understand and to beginning to heal, and to remind each other to kind of hang in there. So I also just wanted to share, there's so many benefits from support groups, but especially with our model, again, because it's peer-led, we don't discuss a lot of other things, right? So there's not any medical or legal advice that we talk about. We don't provide in the group psychological counseling. We know that there are professionals out there who have gone through a lot to get credentialed and licensed in the work that they do. And so our recommendation is, if you feel like you do need additional help in some of those fields, that you bring AFTD's provider letter with you, and that can share a background of your situation and kind of introduce the professional to FTD. But that really is a space that's outside of, what our groups are meant for. So hopefully that's helpful for folks.
I think that's really helpful, Bridget. And Amy and I talk about this all the time, that of course, medication is a part of the conversation for care, but that's really a conversation that you want to have with your medical team. So
yeah.
when that topic comes up in group, it's not taboo, but Amy and I will just turn people back to their medical providers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with legal and financial advice. But one of the things that you just said I really loved is the idea of celebrating the successes. And sometimes that's something that only somebody inside the community can understand. Like when you get your loved one to maybe get dressed in the morning so that you could leave the house on time for work one day for the first time, or maybe they went to an adult day health program for the first time so that you could go home and have a quiet house for the day. I think you're going to have real cheerleaders there sitting around the table, maybe in a way that your friends who haven't had a caregiving experience wouldn't understand the significance. Wouldn't you say, Amy?
Yeah, Katie, I'm just thinking about the story of a caregiver from one of our recent support groups who had made some adjustments in the environment of their home, and now their loved one was able to participate in a recreational sport that they hadn't done in quite some time. And so they had been practicing this sport over the past few days before the support group, and he was just so happy that this was something that they could share again.
Yes, yeah. And I think that contributes to the story. So for many of us, receiving a diagnosis of a frontal temporal disorder is devastating. And there are many challenges related to caregiving. But isn't it so important to also have it be part of our story, that we have mastery as caregivers, that we have successes as caregivers, and that there can also be new memories of joy along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I value that in support group, when we can support each other.
Yeah, and Katie, go ahead, Bridget.
No, please.
I was going to say that, I know, Katie, you and we try to, when a caregiver comes and presents an issue or a problem, we try to hold back. We don't try to jump in and address the problem right away. We want the other caregivers in the group to be able to help, because not only does I think it help to hear from, for the original caregiver to hear from other caregivers, but it gives those other caregivers a sense of purpose that, everything they've gone through is helping others now.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that that's how we inspire caregivers to consider taking on the role of peer facilitator. Amy and I are so lucky in Boston that we're joined by 3 other co-facilitators in the greater Boston area. And then I just had a reach out from a current support group member who said that one day he would also like to be a peer facilitator. And I have to think that that must be from the work that we're all doing to really help people feel like they can have a leadership role at any time in the group.
Yeah,
That's really wonderful. So a big issue, I think, that when people are thinking about attending a support group is just not feeling comfortable. They've never been in a support group before. Maybe they don't think of themselves who wants to share things about their personal life with people they don't know. Bridget, could you talk about what are some of the things that we are doing in support groups to help people feel as comfortable as possible to join?
Yeah. Well, I think currently with COVID, most of our groups aren't meeting in their typical in-person formats anyway. And the virtual option kind of gives people, I think, a dual reality, right? So for some, it could be, it's really not as needing to be as intentional about, carving out enough time to drive to the group, to, sit there, to be, you can call in, you don't have to be on camera if you don't want to be, and you can check it out and see if it's something that's for you. So I think that that's a huge plus to this kind of odd time that we're in, that gives people a point of connection. Or you can join with camera and, meet others and again, just see if it's for you. For others, it's creating a different challenge if their person diagnosed with FTD is home with them and they can't create that space to be able to feel comfortable sharing. And so, I think 2020 presented itself with many challenges, but it's not unlike any that, as caregivers and families that are affected by FTD have to deal with, long before the pandemic. And so, getting and giving support in creative ways is just another example of those adjustments that I think everyone probably in this journey has to make throughout the journey. And so, the group is really here to be a place of understanding with that. And it also means that everyone's really good at getting creative. So, doing what works best. If you're joining a group while you're walking your dog, do that. If you, have to go sit in your car for the group, go do that. Those kinds of things that we can really talk about. Maybe it means that you can't talk, but you can have your earbuds in while you're attending to other tasks and be listening in. Maybe it means that, if you can't share in the moment, you use the chat function in Zoom, or you send an email to the leader afterwards that they can pass along with some of your thoughts after you've had some space to be able to do that. So I think it's just really important that, that we understand that the support group doesn't mean that you have to be this focused time of, that intense connecting, but it can mean that you're there and present as you're able to be, and that's okay. And so with that lens, I think, AFTD works with all of our volunteers through trainings throughout the year to really make sure that people do feel comfortable. So, we were very intentional about creating that confidential space prior, and now that we've moved into this virtual space, we've reacted intentionally again, to ensure some added levels of security and some guidelines for our volunteers to continue to create that space and come together. I can talk more about that if people have specific questions. I think everyone has different working definitions of confidentiality or, their comfort level with security, et cetera. But, I think that for a lot of people out there, they don't think that the support group is for them, as Katie was describing. And I think, maybe you've tried one and you felt like it wasn't for you. I would encourage you in this space, particularly where it is probably the easiest it's going to be in terms of being able to call in and just listen, is to encourage you to just try an FTD specific group. But, again, this isn't necessarily something that is for everyone, and that's okay. And so we do provide other forms of support. And I know Amy's going to also share some ways that, she has some information as well about some other ways to try that. But, we offer, our helpline is a big one. You can call and talk to our staff specifically, and they've been trained to be able to answer, very specific questions. Our website has a whole host of different means of kind of hearing other people's experiences through their own journeys first person, as well as, kind of that larger informational piece. But it doesn't matter what you do. It could mean that you go to the gym. The important thing is, or, you go for a run. I guess you shouldn't be going to the gym right now in some states, but, going and doing some of those things that are, maybe it's dancing for you, or you can take a virtual dance class, or, there just needs to be something, listening to your favorite song in the morning, or having that cup of coffee that Amy was describing earlier. The point is that you're taking care of yourself in a way that is meaningful for you. These resources are available to you through our organization, and we hope that you're able to take advantage, and we want you to. But, if there's something that isn't working for you, that's okay too. This is a low pressure. We aren't, kind of continuing that idea of judgment. We know that everyone has their own means and ways of having to do things of what works best for them in their own situations. And so we're definitely respectful of that, and want to encourage you to do that. And so I know that, again, there's a lot of different resources out there, but again, just trying the group and seeing, and then moving on if that's not the case. And I know, again, Amy's going to describe some more of that.
Yeah, I think that, Amy, you have seen that sometimes it's not that people want the whole group, but there might be another opportunity for connection.
Yeah, we've often had kindred spirit in another group member. And they've, reached out to us as facilitators to say, hey, I think something in my experience would help this other caregiver. Just this week we had caregivers who are siblings. One caregiver reached out to me, hey, I saw this person in support group, and I think I could help her, because caring for a sibling is very different from caring for a parent or caring for a spouse or partner. And so we really like to, play matchmaker with agreeable caregivers, so that they can share their experiences and help each other.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And Bridget, what the other thing that I really appreciate about you joining us today is, Amy and I represent the Boston area FTD Caregiver Support Group, but AFTD offers a wider range of services, including supports for persons living with a diagnosis. We had a question presented in the Q&A that talked about what happens if you think that your loved one living with a diagnosis would benefit from a support group, but you worry that they might have trouble understanding others in that support group environment. How are facilitators in that person living with a diagnosis space able to manage that?
Sure, that's a good question. So thank you for sending that along. So I think one of the two pieces, those groups specifically are led by our most senior staff. So, they've been with our organization for 10 plus years and really understand the needs of our community. And so from that perspective, we have two Zoom groups. Each one is led by a different person. And again, one of them is our director of program, Sharon Denny, and the other one is our program manager, Matt Sharp. And again, both of them have more than 10 years experience at AFTD. So I think that that's one thing, that it's a really skilled person that's running the group. And I think we, again, there's a lot of different ways that people define what a support group is. So I think that we should kind of take the barriers off of that a little bit and recognize that for that particular group or those particular groups, it really is coming and sharing whatever space that you are coming in and sharing from. And so, it could be that it's not going to work as the progression continues, and that understanding might not be able to happen. But, you know, I think it's worth a conversation with the facilitators to see where, you know, where they're coming from with having done this for such a long time, and understanding, you know, a little bit more about the individual person that's wanting to join. So they always have a conversation with the person ahead of time, and kind of introduce them to the group. And then also, you know, have it be a trial period, and with no pressure. Again, we don't want to kind of continue to place judgment on that, or feel like you have to do something. But, you know, really just allowing them some space if it feels like it's available, to be able to come and connect however they need to. So hopefully that's helpful for the question.
I think so. And I think the key piece that you mentioned there is maybe just as a caregiver, not having the expectation that a support group for the person that you're caring for would look exactly like yours.
Right.
And I've had the privilege of participating in patient support groups through our speech and language department at MGH, and they do look different than the caregiver focused support groups that I've been a part of. But I will say that one thing that feels strong and the same is this sense of connection and community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love it that comes through, even if the logistics are a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I will say that our folks that are participants in that group, so the group moved to Zoom for the persons living with FTD. Don't hold me to this, but I think it's been 3 or 4 years. So they were the first ones who said, we want to come and join via camera, and not just on the phone. And so they were kind of ahead of us with, you know, all of the Zoom that's now happening because of the pandemic. But I do think that really was breaking through one of the barriers, where you can see if someone's, you know, needing a minute to get their thoughts together or process in a way that you couldn't previously on the phone. So I think, you know, some of those kinds of adjustments, really making it more inclusive. And, you know, the facilitators for those groups are always intentional about how to make it better, how to make it more adaptable so that people are able to come. And maybe it means that, you know, the chat function, again, is something that's utilized and the facilitators are using as an example of that. But they were ahead of us for sure with Zoom, so.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for explaining that. Our next question is about support groups in different areas around the country. And so it might be a great time, Bridget, for you to share your slides and talk about how can you go on the AFTD website to find resources local to you. This caregiver is asking about specifically Washington, D.C.
Yeah, sure. So give me one moment to get some of the slides up.
Of course.
And all right. So I know this looks a little busy, but this is a picture of the front page of our website. And so actually, you all might not be able to see our helpline number because of all of our faces on the side there, but there's another slide that has it, or you can move our pictures around to see
Bridget, Bridget, it's right at the top of the page also. Helpline 1866.
Oh, indeed, on our front page, which is great. Amy, it's right here. So, so this is kind of how you can find some of the pieces that we've been talking about today. So on our front page, all of the pieces on around red here, and then I kind of hovered over the find help, and that's where some of the information is. So I've kind of boxed some of the pieces that we described. The first one that I wanted to bring your attention to that we didn't really talk about, but is a great resource is, you know, how the pandemic is affecting our lives and those affected by FTD. And so that's really helpful to it's a short page that kind of gives you some outlines of ways that some tips and strategies, as well as some encouragement. We know that this is a hard space for people. And then in particular, the find support near you and the support for people with FTD. And so if you click on one of those, I'll show you what comes up next. So this is the Find Support page. It has a map of the whole US, and the little icons on there, the ones in red are the ones that are affiliated with FTD or AFTD, and the ones in gray are the ones that are FTD specific but are not affiliated with us. So I used Massachusetts and Katie's group as the example here. So you can either find out specific information by clicking on, one of those icons specifically in your area, or down below that, a little further down on select the state to begin, you can choose Massachusetts. And what happens there, again, you might need to move our faces on the screen there, but it comes to this Massachusetts support page. And it shows all of the groups that are there. Underneath of that, it also shows all of the clinics that are available that have an FTD specific expertise level. And in this space, it doesn't only show you Massachusetts, it also shows you surrounding areas. So there's, in this situation, Connecticut and New Hampshire, so that if you're living a little further out, you can still navigate that. And then this is the page that I was describing before with the COVID and FTD, and kind of some of the pieces that can be helpful. So again, from that front page, you can get to here under that Find Help tab. And then this is a whole page for support for persons with FTD. And so, I would encourage you down here, this is where you can find more information. I put a box around it, finding peer support, and the web-based Zoom support group information, as well as, other avenues to gain support for persons living with FTD. And so, in terms of any questions, I'm happy to, if either you can contact me directly in my email, you can call our helpline anytime, or, if you have any other questions that you wanted to put into the Q&A or afterwards with Katie. In the meantime, I did just pull a larger version of the resources that are available in Massachusetts, since that's where it's being local to, and you can see these 4 groups that currently are running groups. So I know some of these, they're all monthly. I know in this time they have increased, some of them have increased to, like Katie and Amy have done weekly, but these are, the normal times outside of COVID that they typically are meeting, and then the information, contact information. So all of our different states and different regions, they'll have the same information so that you can contact the support group volunteer directly and make sure that it's still meeting at the right time, or if you have questions about the group specifically. So hopefully that's a good short interlude of how to gain support and ask those questions.
That's great. And I think about how even if you might be someone who's connected to our MGH Community Forum Fridays because you live local, you might have a sibling or another person who's connected to your loved one's care that lives in a different part of the country. So what a great resource to be able to find support near you.
Yeah, and I know that Katie had mentioned that these are being recorded. So if you needed to kind of take a look back, you can scroll back a little bit on the channel to be able to see exactly where that was on the homepage. But again, it's under that Find Help part. So we encourage you to do so. And if you have any questions, our helpline's here to help answer.
I love that. Well, I don't see any other questions in our Q&A box today, and I wanted to take a moment to not only thank you specifically, Bridget, for everything that you're doing to grow the network of care and support services across the country, but also to thank AFTD for the thoughtful leadership for our entire FTD community. So I want to thank you and AFTD for that.
Thanks, Katie. I appreciate that. And I know that, that I will pass along the message as well. So thank you. And, I think that I come to this work very humbly as not someone that's been personally affected. However, I've been a caregiver in other instances and know, what that trajectory can mean outside of FTD, but in an intense situation. And so, I do think that it is such an important space to be able to, provide people with what they need. And so we're always listening. If people have suggestions or thoughts about, what else they need, feel free to contact us. We do listen well and respond well to those things as we can. So thanks.
Of course. And Amy, thank you for your dedication, turning your love and care for your mom into purpose and direction and support for other caregivers. And I also just extend that gratitude to our other Boston area FTD support group leaders and every AFTD support group leader across the country.
Thanks, Katie. I don't think I'd be here if it wasn't for your leadership and inspiration. So thank you for all you've done for the FTD community.
Thank you. Well, we're so thankful that all of you have joined us today. We hope this session has been helpful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.